I'm so happy to be here at PopTech. I just wanted to mention at the upshot that you can engage with me via Twitter, via the handle that you see on the screen behind you. All right. How many of you know who this guy is? All right. This is Richard, the protagonist of the latest season, or actually every season of Silicon Valley thus far. And Richard's task in this season of Silicon Valley is to think about how to build a truly decentralized internet. Long the dream for all of us who are geeks and engineers and people who just care about democracy and transparency. How to build a truly decentralized internet that evades problems with censorship, surveillance, economic inequality, and so on. So clearly, as you've heard in the first two talks this morning, and also you'll hear in my talk, this is a topic that has come home to roost. This is a big topic that defines our times today, but also our future moving forward. Because actually, this is the internet as well. This is the fiber optic cable infrastructure that serves as an infrastructural backbone of the internet. These are fiber optic cables that are located underneath the ocean surface that connect various parts of the world, that actually contain and translate and transmit the data that connects us all. And what's very important here is that this mapping in many ways resembles what we see when we see the most popular plane flights, the most sort of trafficked plane flights that are out there. And this is the point I want to make, that infrastructures always follow relationships of economic and political power. For example, if you look at this graphic right here, you can see that there are only two cables connecting the major continents of the global south, of South America and of Africa. And so that actually speaks to the digital world, even on a very basic fundamental level, as being unequal on a global level as well. So what do we do about it? Well, Facebook has its response to this. This is a term that Facebook and Google describe as the last billion. How do we connect people that are unconnected to the internet? But of course, Facebook's vision of what that connectivity would look like is hardly equal. It's actually a non-net neutral internet, and it got booted out of India recently because the internet that Facebook would make available and accessible to these developing world users, who comprise the vast majority of users of the internet and emerging users of the internet, is an internet that is based on Facebook-sponsored advertisers. So the openness, the decentralized nature of the internet that we all believe in, that is fundamentally democratic, is being threatened as we speak in lots of different ways. So we have to think about connectivity in ways that respect the voices, values, and cultures of people around the world, of developing world people, especially in a world that is deeply unequal, and in a nation also, here in the United States, that's also unequal, as we've talked about this morning. Because actually, we often use metaphors to describe the internet. And one of the most popular metaphors that's used is the cloud, right? Like, who can have a problem with the cloud? Our bodies are made of water, clouds are made of water. So this is a way of naturalizing various sorts of actual technologies that are constructed in the image of their designers. And the reason why I have these three logos overlaid with the image of the cloud here is in the country of Mexico, where I currently do my field work with indigenous peoples, as I'll speak about in a little bit. 90%, approximately, 90% of all digital traffic within the country of Mexico goes through one of these three company data servers. So that means that your communications, much like the fiber optic cables that I already showed, are not necessarily governed by territory or nation or the state. They are actually extraterritorial, they are international, and they are mined and monetized by various companies. So we have to understand that digital communications, even with your neighbor next door to you in Mexico, might actually go through a Microsoft, Google, or Facebook server. So this is very important to pay attention to, because we need to understand all the machineries, the mechanisms, the systems of power, and the systems of monetization that lie behind the technologies that have come to order our world. This is perhaps the most important slide I'll show that actually I've taken from Tom Goodwin's work on Havas Media. Now, this is something very, very important. Tim O'Reilly this morning spoke about the shift away from labor toward capital in relation to digital economies and new emerging digital industries. And I think that's an important point to note. But it's not just about labor, it's also about the production of content, right? So if you look, for example, at Facebook, we can't simply think about Facebook as a technology in a sort of traditional engineering-oriented sense. We have to think about it as a media company, as a media network, as we know all too well in the United States, where we see more people going to Facebook as a source of news than the Washington Post, CNN, New York Times put together. So why do we go on these platforms? We go because of what one another, other users, post on these platforms. We go to these platforms to experience and communicate and share information and transact with one another. But if the infrastructure, meaning the technology that coordinates, monetizes, algorithmizes those forms of connectivity, gets the lion's share of the money, then that's a major problem in terms of these issues of inequality. And that's also a major issue in terms of these issues of labor. So that's a huge problem. That's Alibaba's slide that I have in the back, but you can also consider Amazon as well. So we have to think about these issues, and they're so important to think about with the onset of automation, because increasingly, of course, at the present, but also moving into the future, these sorts of systems, these platforms that have come to dominate our world, that have come to dominate our data, that have come to monetize our data, are going to give way to various forms of automated algorithms and AI systems that are going to be learning not only based on the world, the data that they are trained to learn upon, but also based on the values of their designers. And the reason why I showed this example is this was a simple application that was created by a Moscow-based computer science, a company, an entrepreneurial company. But of course, it reflected the sort of biases of those designers, not necessarily an explicitly kind of race-based idea, but at least implicit bias, right? And it learns from a world that sees beauty perhaps in ways that are more white than black. So the biases of our world that we think of as biased but excluded from technology are actually neutralized. They are neutrally encoded, supposedly, into the technologies that then we take and treat as the truth. So that's really stunning when we see, President Obama, who most of my female friends at least think is very, very handsome, being seen as more handsome when his face is more white than black, right? So we have to think about this, because if we simply release and treat these AI systems that are built on top of these platforms that we spend 6+ hours a day using, according to some statistics, then we're simply accepting the world as it is rather than developing a critical literacy around how to make it better. So these are some of the issues that I'm dealing with in my recent book. And at the minimum, you should pick up the book, or at least engage with me around the book, or check it out from a library, even better, for the cool cover on the book. But the book really explores how the biases that are built into systems that have come to order, naturalize, and connect the world actually reflect, in many cases, the values of those creators, right? I'll give you a very simple example. This is an article I published with Quartz, so sister publication of The Atlantic, right when the book came out. And I was talking about a very, very kind of simple and, in a sense, innocent sort of invitation I had by UNESCO to visit the country of Cameroon. So Cameroon is Anglophone and Francophone. It's actually quite a developed country, based on how you look at that, in West Africa. And I would think Google would know so much about me that it would want to know, that I would want to know, that I would learn about Cameroon when I did a simple search on Cameroon from the perspective of bloggers or media networks that are in Cameroon. But on page 1, which 95% of people in their queries don't get past, I didn't see a single web page from Cameroon. And in my top 3 results, I found sites like the CIA World Factbook and other sort of sites that were produced in the United States about Cameroon. And that's not inherently problematic, but it's reflective of the biases that we simply treat as neutral or natural. So we have to think about these issues on a global level as well, and that's the key point of my book. And the reason why that's so important is because the vast majority of the internet's users are not here in Maine. They're not in the United States. They're not in Western Europe. They are in the developing world. They are in the global south. So if those people are simply invisible users to accumulate and gather and monetize data from, we are not creating a more equal or just or actually connected world. We can do better. So a key concept that I look at in my writing, and this is the only academic part, I hope, of this talk, is the term ontology. So when I say I know something, how is it that I express that knowledge? That is ontological, right? So for those of you who speak different languages, the way you express your ideas or thoughts or beliefs around something, that is ontology. So think about, for example, the differences between speaking Mandarin and the way Mandarin in the Mandarin language classifies different ideas semantically and syntactically versus speaking English. Those forms of ontological difference, that is fundamental to what I argue is diversity. So diversity is not simply being black or brown or from this country or that country. It's about the very fundamental differences, which is beautiful and to be appreciated, by which we know, by which we understand the world in different ways. And that is something to be deeply appreciated. And that is also something I argue in this book and right now that we have to take into account as we build systems and as we think about what systems mean. We can build interfaces, we can build algorithms, we can build interfaces. I already said that. We can build computer languages. I just keep thinking about interfaces. We can build these technological building blocks in the image of diversity, rather than some sort of neutral engineering idea that we know has never been neutral. So I want to give you two quick examples of how I'm attempting to do exactly this. Because if you simply take something like a Mandarin knowledge system, or even more so, an Aboriginal knowledge system, and you try to simply translate it by learning about that knowledge from an English dictionary, you lose the depth of that knowledge. We have to appreciate difference as we think about technology, and we need to build technology accordingly. First example, I worked with the Zuni Native American community in New Mexico for 7 years, thanks to National Science Foundation support between 2008 and 2015. And what's amazing is when you work with such a community and you reimagine technology from that perspective, there's a great deal that you can learn. For example, you would think here a group of Zuni elders are simply examining some pelt of an animal. And it looks like that, and it is partly true. But what they're also looking at is an indigenous created map. Think about this term ontology here. If you simply understand this map in a Western Cartesian way, you actually lose the entire insight into what makes that map work. It's built around a coordinate system, a system of storytelling, a system of geography and history that can't be neatly one-to-one translated into a Western mapping system. So I worked with this community because this community was interested in getting access to objects from their heritage that are sitting in museums all over the world. And what was amazing is we built a system, a digital museum system, that is now living at the community, and this is how the community uses the system. It's not one person per laptop, not one person per computer, nothing wired inside the body, no Oculus Rift here, right? This is something completely different. This is a collective practice of engaging with technology. And at times, while this was occurring, people were putting their fingers in their ears, and people were coming in and out of the room, and they were speaking different languages. Sometimes they were speaking English, sometimes they were speaking Zuni. And the reason why is this is how people know at Zuni. It's based on who you are, your familial line, your kiva, which is like a kinship line. It's based on gender. It's based on seniority. These are other practices of knowing that we erase when we flatten the world in this kind of one-to-one simplified relationship with technology, information, and people. And we can do better than that. And the next example that I want to share, and I promise to talk about it more with any of you who are interested, is the largest community-owned and created cell phone network in the world. And this is in the Oaxaca region in Mexico. So these are Zapotec, Mixtec, and Mije communities located around Oaxaca, which is in southern Mexico. And they don't have cell phone service, but they want that service because they have relatives in Mexico City, in other cities, even in Los Angeles, where I live and teach. And they need these cell phones to transact, to sell goods, to do agriculture, to do trading, and not get ripped off. And their languages are spoken and rarely written because of histories where those languages were considered not equal to the Spanish language. So they're talking their language on their cell phones, but they have not been provided service because they're simply not rich enough. They don't have the money. They don't have the resources. So they said instead, what if we created ourselves? We own, we build these systems, and we accumulate the money that's made out of these processes in our own communities. And it turns out they're paying 1/20th the price they would if they signed up for Carlos Slim's Telcel network. So just to close, it's extremely important to have global conversations. It's really important for us to talk about human rights, about climate change, about war, about our interconnectedness, because we're all from all over the world, especially in the United States. We're such a diverse country. But it can never come at the cost of erasing, silencing, and flattening who we are in our local communities, in our own cultures. And we see that being threatened more and more with civic disinvestment in this country, but actually all over the world. And the last point I want to make is we must have power over our identities in the digital age. So what am I meaning there? Who I am right now while I'm on stage is totally different, trust me, than when you hang out with me and have a beer later. And who I am right now on stage is also different when I'm at home, trust me, with my wife or with my puppy, right? These are different forms of self that we should have power over. But when data is being collected about us indiscriminately and is being blurred, aggregated, and retained, and then pushed out through algorithms that shape our lives and even our minds, as I pointed out, in ways we have no control over, that is deeply damaging to who we are. So I want us to do better. I want us to start with community, culture, and people as we rethink digital technology. Thank you so much.